The unwelcome guest. You're not welcome here. The words cut through the elegant atmosphere of the Grand Meridian Hotel like a knife. Mary Ann Lawrence stood frozen in the marble-floored lobby, her simple gray sweatshirt and faded jeans suddenly feeling like a scarlet letter against the backdrop of crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. At 43, Mary Ann had learned to carry herself with quiet dignity, but today exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. She'd spent 12 hours at the community center, organizing food donations and serving meals to families who couldn't afford their next meal. Her hands still bore the slight redness from washing countless dishes, and her blonde hair was tucked carelessly under a worn baseball cap. She hadn't planned to look like this when meeting Franklin. The community center had called in a crisis, their volunteer coordinator had called in sick, and 40 families were depending on the weekly food distribution. Mary Ann couldn't say no, even knowing she'd be cutting it close for Franklin's arrival at the social reform conference. The Grand Meridian Hotel lived up to its reputation. Wrought iron gates opened to reveal an opulent lobby where every surface gleamed with expensive polish. Well-dressed guests moved through the space like characters in a movie, their conversations a refined murmur beneath the soft classical music. Mary Ann's sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor as she approached the concierge desk. The young woman behind the counter offered a professional smile that faltered when she took in Mary Ann's appearance. "I'm here to meet my husband," Mary Ann explained, adjusting the strap of her canvas tote bag. "He should be arriving shortly for the conference." Before the concierge could respond, a commanding voice interrupted from behind. "Excuse me." Mary Ann turned to face a man in his late 40s with perfectly styled silver-streaked hair and a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His name tag read, Elliot Winchester, hotel manager, and his expression was a study in polite disdain. "May I help you?" His smile was practiced, professional, and completely hollow. "I'm just waiting for my husband," Mary Ann repeated, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Several guests had begun to stare, their conversations growing quieter. "I see." Elliot's eyes moved from her baseball cap to her sneakers, cataloging each casual item. "And does your husband have a reservation with us?" The way he emphasized husband made Mary Ann's cheeks warm. She'd encountered this type of skepticism before, the assumption that someone dressed like her couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. "Yes, he does," she replied simply, keeping her voice steady. Elliot's smile tightened. "Perhaps I could help you find a more appropriate place to wait." The suggestion hung in the air like an insult wrapped in silk. Mary Ann felt the eyes of the other guests boring into her, some curious, others uncomfortable with the unfolding scene. "I'm perfectly comfortable waiting here, thank you," she said, straightening her shoulders. Something shifted in Elliot's demeanor. The polite veneer began to crack, revealing the condescension beneath. The confrontation escalates. Elliot Winchester's posture stiffened as he glanced around the lobby, clearly concerned about the image Mary Ann projected in his carefully curated environment. The other guests were beginning to notice the tension, and whispered conversations rippled through the elegant space. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a controlled whisper, "the Grand Meridian has standards we must maintain. We're hosting distinguished guests today for an important conference. Perhaps you don't realize the nature of our establishment." Mary Ann had encountered this attitude countless times over the past 20 years, the polite veneer barely concealing deep-seated prejudice. After 2 decades of public life alongside Franklin, she could spot condescension from a mile away. "I'm well aware of what kind of hotel this is, Mr. Winchester," she replied, her voice calm but firm. A well-dressed elderly couple nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away, pretending not to listen to the increasingly uncomfortable exchange. The young concierge shifted nervously behind her desk, while 2 junior staff members hovered uncertainly near the front desk. "Then you'll understand why I must insist," Elliot continued, his professional mask beginning to slip. He gestured toward the ornate entrance doors. "There's a lovely cafe across the street where you might be more comfortable." One of the hovering staff members, an older woman with kind eyes, took a step forward. Mary Ann caught her gaze and saw something flicker there, recognition, perhaps, or at least sympathy for the situation unfolding. "I'm staying right here," Marianne stated firmly. "My husband specifically asked me to meet him in this lobby." Elliot's patience was visibly thinning. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but this isn't going to work. We have strict security protocols, especially with today's event." "I'm not trying to pull anything," Marianne replied, her voice still measured despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Nevertheless, I must insist." His voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from the growing audience of guests and staff. "Either provide proof that you're a registered guest, or I'll have to ask you to leave." The older female employee stepped forward again, her expression troubled. "Mr. Winchester, I think perhaps." "That will be all, Mrs. Davis," he cut her off without taking his eyes off Marianne. "Please return to your duties." Mrs. Davis hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but ultimately stepped back with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Winchester," Marianne began, trying one more time to reason with him, "I understand you believe you're doing your job, but—" "No, I don't think you do understand," he interrupted, his professional composure finally cracking. He gestured dismissively at her clothing. "This is the Grand Meridian. We maintain certain standards of appearance and conduct." Marianne felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-building anger. She'd spent her day helping people who couldn't afford their next meal, and now this man was judging her worth based on the absence of designer labels. "Are you seriously discriminating against me based on my clothes?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough edge to cut through his arrogance. "I'm enforcing our policies," Elliot replied, straightening his already perfect tie. "This isn't a public space. Now, I've asked nicely. Please leave before I'm forced to call security." Security called. The lobby had grown uncomfortably quiet, the usual refined chatter replaced by an expectant hush. Guests pretended to check their phones or examine the artwork, but every ear was tuned to the confrontation unfolding near the concierge desk. Marianne stood her ground, acutely aware of the stares. She could end this humiliation immediately by revealing her identity, but something deep inside her refused to give this arrogant man the satisfaction. Why should she have to prove her worth based on who she was married to? "Fine," Elliot snapped, his face flushed with irritation. He reached for the radio clip to his belt. "Security to the main lobby, please. Immediately." Mrs. Davis, the older staff member, took another tentative step forward. "Mr. Winchester, perhaps we should." "Mrs. Davis, I've told you to return to your duties," he said sharply, not even glancing in her direction. His eyes remained fixed on Marianne with undisguised contempt. Within moments, a security guard appeared, a middle-aged man who looked distinctly uncomfortable as he took in the scene. His eyes moved from the well-dressed manager to the casually clothed woman, clearly questioning the situation. "Sir," the guard asked hesitantly. "You called for security?" "Yes, Jenkins." Elliot gestured toward Marianne as if she were a particularly unpleasant problem to be solved. "Please escort this person from the premises. She's been asked to leave multiple times and is refusing to comply." Jenkins looked at Marianne, then back at his manager. "Sir, are you sure about this? She doesn't seem to be causing any actual disturbance. Are you questioning my judgment?" Elliot's voice carried a dangerous edge. "This woman is trespassing. She has no business being in our establishment, and her presence is making our legitimate guests uncomfortable." Marianne could see several guests shifting uncomfortably, but whether from her presence or from witnessing Elliot's behavior, she couldn't be sure. A few looked genuinely disturbed by what they were witnessing. "Ma'am," Jenkins said reluctantly, his voice much gentler than his manager's, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "This is absolutely ridiculous," Marianne said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the growing audience. "I have every right to be here." Elliot stepped closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper meant only for her ears. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. You can walk out with dignity, or security can escort you out. Your choice." The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Even the classical music seemed quieter, as if the hotel itself was waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Mrs. Davis caught Marianne's eye from across the lobby and gave her the slightest nod, not of agreement with the manager's actions, but of understanding and support. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything in that moment of humiliation. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career," Marianne said quietly, meeting Elliot's gaze with steady determination. He smiled coldly. "The only mistake here was yours, thinking you could walk into the Grand Meridian dressed like that and expecting to be treated like you belong." Just as Jenkins reluctantly moved to take Marianne's arm, the massive front doors of the hotel swung open. The afternoon sunlight streamed in, silhouetting a tall figure in an expensive suit. Elliot Winchester was about to discover just how catastrophically wrong he had been. The husband arrives. Franklin Lawrence stepped through the ornate doors of the Grand Meridian with the confident stride of a man accustomed to respect. At 52, he commanded attention effortlessly, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his presence radiating the quiet authority that came from decades in the public eye. The moment he entered, several guests recognized him immediately. Whispers of "Is that," and "Senator Lawrence," rippled through the crowd. But Franklin's attention was focused entirely on the scene unfolding near the concierge desk. His wife, his beloved Marianne, stood surrounded by hotel security, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. A manager in an expensive suit was gesturing dismissively at her, clearly in the middle of having her removed from the premises. Franklin's expression darkened as he took in the situation. 23 years of marriage had taught him to read Marianne's body language perfectly, and right now, she was fighting to maintain her dignity in the face of obvious humiliation. "Marianne." His voice carried across the lobby, clear and unmistakably authoritative. Every head in the vicinity turned toward him. The security guard's hand, which had been moving toward Marianne's arm, froze in midair. The whispered conversation stopped entirely. Marianne's face lit up with relief. "Franklin." Elliot Winchester's confident expression faltered slightly as he took in the newcomer's obvious importance. The way other guests were reacting, the expensive cut of his clothes, the air of unmistakable authority, this was clearly someone significant. Franklin strode across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "What exactly is happening here?" "Sir," Elliot began, his tone automatically shifting to the deferential manner he reserved for VIP guests, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding with this individual. We were just—" "This individual," Franklin interrupted, his voice carrying the same commanding tone he used in Senate hearings, "is my wife." The words hit the lobby like a thunderclap. Elliot's face went through a remarkable transformation, from condescension to confusion to dawning horror as the implications became clear. Your wife," he stammered. "Senator Franklin Lawrence," someone in the crowd whispered, and the recognition spread like wildfire through the gathered guests. Franklin moved to stand beside Marianne, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Marianne, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the strain in her voice was evident. "I was just waiting for you, as we planned." Franklin's gaze moved from the security guard to the manager, his expression growing colder by the second. "Would someone care to explain why my wife was being escorted out of this establishment?" Elliot Winchester's face had gone completely pale. The arrogant manager who had been so confident moments earlier now looked like a man watching his career implode in real time. "Senator Lawrence," he began, his voice shaking slightly, we didn't realize, she wasn't properly. I mean, she didn't identify herself as." "Identify herself?" Franklin's voice carried a dangerous edge. "My wife needs to provide identification to wait for me in a hotel lobby?" Mrs. Davis stepped forward, her expression a mixture of vindication and concern. "Mr. Winchester, I tried to tell you." "Not now, Mrs. Davis," Elliot snapped, then immediately realized his mistake as Franklin's eyebrows rose. "Actually," Franklin said, his tone deceptively calm, "I'd very much like to hear what Mrs. Davis has to say." Justice and resolution. Mrs. Davis glanced nervously between her manager and the senator, then straightened her shoulders with newfound courage. "I recognized Mrs. Lawrence the moment she walked in," she said clearly. "I've seen her picture in the newspapers countless times, especially the articles about her charity work. I tried to tell Mr. Winchester, but he wouldn't listen." Franklin's expression grew even more thunderous. "Charity work? I spent the day at the community center," Marianne explained quietly. "We had an emergency with the food distribution program. 40 families were counting on us." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. While Marianne had been serving those in need, she was being judged and humiliated for not meeting arbitrary standards of appearance. Franklin turned his full attention to Elliot Winchester, and the manager visibly shrank under his gaze. "So let me understand this correctly. My wife spent her day feeding hungry families, came here to meet me as planned, and you decided to have her forcibly removed because she wasn't dressed to your satisfaction." "Senator Lawrence, there was a misunderstanding, our policies." Elliot's voice trailed off as he realized how hollow his excuses sounded. "Your policies," Franklin repeated, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had served him well in 20 years of public service. "Tell me, Mr. Winchester, are these written policies, or just your personal prejudices?" The gathered crowd watched in fascination as one of the most powerful men in the state systematically dismantled the arrogant manager's justifications. Several guests had their phones out, clearly recording the confrontation. "I want to speak with the owner of this establishment," Franklin continued. "Immediately." "Sir, I am the general manager." "I didn't ask for the general manager. I asked for the owner." Within minutes, an elderly gentleman in an expensive suit hurried into the lobby, his face already showing signs of panic. "Senator Lawrence," he said breathlessly, "I'm Robert Grand, the owner. I came as soon as I heard. Please accept my deepest apologies for this inexcusable situation." Franklin's expression remained stern. "Mr. Grand, your manager just attempted to have my wife forcibly removed from your establishment because he didn't approve of her clothing. She'd spent the day doing charity work, feeding hungry families, and this is how she's treated in your hotel." Robert Grand's face went white. He turned to look at Elliot Winchester with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Winchester, in my office. Now." "Mr. Grand, I was just trying to maintain standards." "You were discriminating against a guest based on appearance," Grand cut him off. "Mrs. Lawrence, Senator, please accept my profound apologies. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable and does not represent the values of the Grand Meridian." Mrs. Davis stepped forward. "If I may, Mr. Grand, I tried to intervene, but Mr. Winchester wouldn't listen." Grand nodded grimly. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Your attempt to do the right thing is noted." He turned back to Franklin and Marianne. "I'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident. I assure you, appropriate action will be taken." Franklin looked at his wife, seeing the exhaustion and hurt in her eyes despite her brave front. "Marianne, would you like to stay for the conference, or would you prefer to go somewhere else?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Davis spoke up. "Mrs. Lawrence, I want you to know that what you do at the community center, it matters. My grandson benefited from your programs last year when my daughter was going through her divorce. You probably don't remember, but you personally made sure he had meals and school supplies." Marianne's eyes softened. "I remember. Tommy, right? How is he doing?" "Wonderful, thanks to people like you." Mrs. Davis's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry about how you were treated today." The crowd that had gathered to witness the drama began to disperse, many looking ashamed of their earlier silence. Several approached Marianne to express their admiration for her charity work and their disapproval of the manager's behavior. "Thank you all," Marianne said graciously. "But I hope this serves as a reminder that we should never judge others based on appearances. You never know what battles someone is fighting or what good they're doing in the world." Robert Grand personally escorted them to the VIP lounge, ensuring they had everything they needed for Franklin's conference. As they settled in, Franklin took his wife's hand. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "For the work you do, for how you handled yourself today, for being the woman I fell in love with." Marianne smiled, the stress of the day finally beginning to fade. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything." "Next time I spend the day at the community center, remind me to pack a change of clothes." Franklin laughed, pulling her close. "Deal. Though honestly, you've never looked more beautiful to me than you do right now." As for Elliot Winchester, his employment at the Grand Meridian ended that very day. His replacement was Mrs. Davis, who implemented new training programs focusing on treating every guest with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance. The story spread quickly through social media and news outlets, not as a tale of revenge, but as a powerful reminder about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of seeing the person behind the appearance. The community center received a flood of donations, and Marianne's food distribution program expanded to serve twice as many families. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who look the least impressive are doing the most important work of all. The end.